Now, what I would like you to do, and this is just a suggestion, is for the next month, spend time confronting your fears. And use the techniques that you learned today, the practical things that you learned today, to actually address those fears, to actually get into those fears and experience them emotionally. Now, whenever we talk about fear or terror, the majority of us instantly go into, why would I want to do that for? You know, what's AJ suggesting? Yeah, I am a bit crazy sometimes, isn't it? That's what it seems like. And particularly making a crazy suggestion like we were going to go into our fears rather than avoid them. You know, most people spend most of their life avoiding. But there are some really powerful reasons why you need to look at addressing your fears. Firstly, all of your fears are what cause your physical pain. So every tiny little bit of physical pain you ever experience in your body, or headaches or any of those, all of them are because of fears. Fears are the blocking or capping emotion. So that's what I'd like to talk about with you for a moment. I've just remembered my pens. Sorry about the whiteboard as well today. We ordered another one, but these are not very good pens. We ordered another one, but it hasn't arrived yet. So the next time we come, there should be this great big thing that the majority of you can see a bit better with. Just all of them, babe. I'll grab them. Thanks. Thanks, darling. Got my collection in here. A bag of goodies. All right, well, let's look what's happening with fear. What happens is, underneath everything, we have some causal emotion. Causal emotion is like grief, shame, sadness, those kind of emotions. Causal emotion, they were created in us when we were very, very young children, usually, right the way up through our childhood and sometimes into our teenage years. And it's all those emotions that actually generate our law of attraction. Now, even the ones that haven't been here before, have you heard of the term law of attraction? Most people have, yeah? The law of attraction is based around what's going on at you in your causal emotion. So in other words, when I feel something inside of my soul, which is all causal emotions, something related to my childhood, those particular emotions, whether I am aware of it or not, and perhaps if we can maybe just open up one of those side doors so that people can come in on the side. Yeah. Whether I feel those causal emotions or not, they generate my law of attraction. So my whole life is governed by these causal emotions, whether I am aware those emotions exist inside of me or not. Right? And this is what a lot of people call the subconscious, you know? And it's that causal emotion that generates everything. Now, on top of that, we usually have blocking emotions. These are the emotions that we were taught to use, usually via our parents, but also by our environment. We were taught to use these blocking emotions to avoid the experience of the causal emotions. Now, the biggest blocking emotions are fear-related. Your fear. I'm terrified of dealing with this emotion, and so straight away I'm now blocking the experience of that emotion. Now, the fear creates all of my problems when it comes to my body. So that my body will start to close down in different areas related to the different emotions, the causal emotions that I'm not experiencing. So you see this happening as we grow older and older, different parts of our body start shutting down. So, you know, you might have been fit young when you were young, but when you're getting to 40 or 50, you start feeling, and the doctors start diagnosing, they might have heart attack issues, for example. So heart problems. And a lot of these problems are so-called generational. because they are passed down from parents to children through their emotional set. So here I am feeling these emotions, and or usually not feeling them, but passing them down from parent to child. And so I'm growing up now, and I get into my later years, and my body starts packing up. And my body's packing up because I am suppressing the actual causal emotions that if released, my body would operate perfectly. I would have no pain, sleep fine every night, have no tablets to take, no medication to take, all of those different things. None of that would happen. But because I've got these blocking emotions, and in particular the fear, what happens is that these causal emotions never get addressed. They never get released. And so it's like carrying around lead weights with you for the rest of your life. Now, you can do that while you're fit and healthy and, as you're growing up, but the longer a lead weight is carried, the harder it is to carry, right? And that applies to your body too. So there's this whole series of blocking emotions, of which fear is probably the most dominant, that cause you to suppress your causal emotion. But often what happens on top of that is we have another layer. And this other layer is the layer that is our little indicator layer, I'd like to call it sometimes. These are the denials, which are also emotions. So they're denial emotions. Now, the one I would like to talk about particularly today is anger. Now, remember in previous discussions I've always said anger includes annoyance, slight annoyance, frustration, and all those kind of things too. So we're not just talking about I'm in a rage, I'm talking about everything from rage right the way down to slight annoyance. That all I'm going to bundle together as anger. Now, they are denial emotions. The anger, so if we look at anger in particular, is the method we use to suppress our fear, or to deny our fear even exists. Now, one of the things I've noticed is that many of the people who have been hearing about the Divine Love Path for the last 12, 18 months or so, many of you have started to deal with some emotions, but then get stuck in this anger, right? And we're getting stuck in anger because we want to avoid our blocking emotions, which is our fear primarily about something. And our fear is helping us get away from our causal emotions. Now, if you look at this from the point of view of changing your law of attraction, so even if you don't want to involve God in the process and all you want to do is just be happier, your happiness is directly dependent upon your causal emotion. In other words, what's happening to you day-to-day life is that your soul is attracting all of the events around you. Every single moment, your soul is continually sending out all these different signals, right? And all of these things that come to you, all of the events that happen to you, are all because of your causal emotion. They're not necessarily because of your blocking emotions, and they're not necessarily because of your denial emotions. They all start at your causal emotional area. Now, blocking emotions can also create, but if you get rid of the causal emotion, you'll never have a blocking emotion to create. So if we focus on this particular part here, we can rapidly change our law of attraction so that we can be happy quite quickly. But the problem is that for the majority of us is we've got this anger first, and then there's fear, and then there's the emotion. And many of you have heard that the emotions that are the healing emotions are really grief-based emotions, right? And then on top of the grief, we've got the fear of the grief. And then on top of that, we've got the anger about the fear of the grief. And so what we're doing a lot of times is we're working in this level where we're angry all the time, or we're annoyed, or even slightly annoyed, or we even go one step further to all of this. And this is the place that a lot of New Age type philosophies recommend you go to. You go into denial of the denial emotion. Right? The denial emotion is anger, and you go into denial of your own anger. So you talk to a person, you're very angry. No, I'm not. Right? And you've got all this rage coming out of them. You know, you can feel it coming out of them a lot of times, right? Just being with them is uncomfortable, and yet they'll say, no, I'm not angry. And why do they do that? Because they're now using the intellect to actually suppress all emotion. Right? Now, when we get into that state where we start suppressing like anger, and which is suppressing fear and so forth, that's when we're starting to get into the depressive states as well, where we start suppressing all emotion, and all depression actually is a result of our desire to suppress anger-based emotions. Does that make sense? So you've got this layer upon layer thing happening. Most people, you know, you've heard about, other people talk about it with regard to onion layers, if you like, and things like that. How you think about it is up to you. What I'm trying to do today and this weekend is to address this area here, this area of blocking emotions and the area of the emotions of denial. Because what I've found myself is that if I address those areas, once I get rid of them, all of the causal emotions just pop out of me like no effort at all. If I don't address them, those causal emotions frustrate the hell out of me. Right? You notice that with your own emotional processing. You're trying to access an emotion, and my suggestion is, if you're trying to access an emotion, give up on trying. Don't bother trying anymore, because you've got a block. And rather than, you know, many of us know, oh, I'm sad about my mother dying, for example. Or I'm sad about my child dying when he was 2. Or I'm sad about, you know, what happened when I was in childhood abuse. I'm sad about, you know, these different events. Many of us know what we're sad about, but we can't feel the sadness. And the reason why we can't feel the sadness is because of these layers that we've got on top that need to firstly be removed. And it's those layers that prevent the emotional experience, right? So, let's look at this process. I'm saying that we're at the stage now where we're no longer deciding to use our intellect anymore. Have you made that choice yet? Right? No longer give up the intellect, just no longer decide to use the intellect. That's the place where you're no longer going to meditate yourself out of an emotion. Do you know what I mean by that? Like calm yourself down, you know, or even go along to some kind of therapist who gets you out of the emotion by doing whatever they do. And you come away feeling really good, but 3 days later you're not feeling good again and you feel like you've got to go back. So you go back and lay on the table and have the same thing done again. You go out feeling good, and then 2 days later you're not feeling good again. So you go back, and we become addicted even to the process of feeling good in that state. In the end, we need to address the cause. If we address the cause, we'll address the cause and we'll feel good all the time on that issue. We won't have to go back anywhere. Our body won't have to have the same pains in it anymore. All of those things change. So what I'm finding with my body is that if I don't deal with an issue, my body lets me know now really rapidly. And many of you are finding that too? Really rapidly, it's shown to me what's going on. And the key is to listen to your body. Your body's a very good barometer of what you're denying. Right? So, I go along and do some spiritual work or some emotional work, and I used to have headaches, and then I go along and do the work, and for a week or two I still have headaches, and then I don't have headaches, and then I start getting headaches again. Is the cause dealt with? No. Quite simple. Right? Do you find you have these like little pains in your knees, you know, like, I don't know about you, but sometimes I have them, you know, where you get a pain in the knee, and all of a sudden you're working away, and all of a sudden your knee sort of goes clunk or whatever it is, and from then on it starts to hurt. And this happens on a regular basis. It doesn't happen anymore for me, but it used to happen on a very regular basis. I haven't dealt with the emotion, whatever that's about. Right? There's an emotion related to that. Right? Everything is based upon a soul-based denial of an emotion or the acceptance of one. In my case at the moment, I've got terrible bowel pains. Right? So that anybody who comes out to my house knows that flatulation is the way of the game, right? And that's the way it goes. Because I've got these emotions connected to this unworthy feeling that I have about myself in relation to my soulmate, right? So that's there pretty constantly. Have I dealt with it? No, because it's still happening, right? Every now and then, what happens is, I don't know if you've noticed today, but my thumb is cracking again. Every time, and then it happens again. So I think I've dealt with emotion, and then a month later, my thumb cracks again. So I haven't dealt with the emotion. I know what it's about, but I still haven't got to the end of it, the cause of it. My body's telling me constantly. Right? And your body's doing the same. It's just whether we notice it or not. That's the thing. So forget the intellect. The intellect's not very good. The only good thing about the intellect is it's a good way of helping you get back into the emotion. So your intellect can help you get out of your emotion, or you can use your intellect to help you get back into your emotion. It's up to you which way you use it. It's just a tool. So let's look at the denial emotions. Anger. There's only usually two reasons for anger. One is we have an expectation that's not getting met. All right? So that's number one. I have an expectation in me that my environment, you guys, are not meeting. You're not treating me nice, I'm angry with you. Does that make sense? It's my anger, there's something inside of me. It comes from a deeper emotion within myself. No matter how you treat me, if I'm angry, there's something within myself that I need to address emotionally. Right? That's the key thing to remember there. Anger is really good emotion, and we've talked about anger a lot in the past, because anger tells you, it's your guide towards your fear. Anger tells you when you're afraid. So if you can remember that. When I am angry, I am just afraid and denying it. So if you can remember that. When I am angry, and replace with angry if you want, slightly annoyed, frustrated, and all of those things that are all related to anger. When I am angry, I am just afraid, but denying it. So anger is an excellent tool to tell you when you're really scared about something. And I don't mean physically scared, I mean emotionally scared about something. Dennis, if we could have a mic, if you leave your hand up, because that way...
Hey Jay, is it possible to have fear to get into anger?
Certainly. If anger can also be, remember, a causal or a blocking childhood emotion. So remember that sometimes in your childhood you had deep grief associated with constant bad treatment, right? And then that clicked into a blocking emotion, and the blocking emotion, that grief, is often anger at the childhood level. And then you could have adult fear about dealing with your anger, certainly. So that certainly does apply. But you won't have adult anger about dealing with your adult fear. Sorry, the other way around. Adult fear about dealing with your adult anger. It'll be coming from some kind of childhood.
Yeah, it feels, I can feel it there, but it's quite frightening.
Yes. Well, you think about what happened to most people when they were little, when they got angry. What did mum and dad do then?
Shut you down.
Well, usually you got a belting, right? Corporal punishment usually was the aim of the game, generally, in that state. So what do you associate with getting angry? Pain. So obviously that association needs to be broken in order for you to work your way through that emotion. So that certainly can be the case. But remember, even if that is the case, the anger, even the childhood anger, is still the denial of the childhood grief. Does that make sense? So it still applies, what I'm saying still applies really in the end. There's these layers. And if you've got the adult layer suppressing the childhood layer, that's just an additional layer on this path, if you like. The key is to allow yourself to experience. And when you do, you'll get through them all. But it certainly can be the other way around, at the childhood level, not at the adult level. Yeah. So does everyone understand what I mean by that? Yeah? So I feel a bit of uncertainty about that from some... No? Okay, you don't have to answer questions if you don't want to. All right, so my anger, which is my denial emotion, my anger is a great tool, you know. It's a great tool. Fastest way to shut down another person, get angry with them. So we learn that at a very young age. Get angry, and we use anger in two ways. One way is because we've had some grief or pain that is over and over and over, reoccurring over and over again. Now, when we have reoccurring grief or pain, we eventually get angry. So most children have had that, when you think about it, reoccurring grief or pain. How many of you felt unloved very young age and then felt unloved most of your childhood? Over and over and over again, right? Majority of us, really. So what's happening there is the feeling of being unloved, feeling I'm unloved again, I'm unloved again. Eventually you get so hurt inside of yourself that you just get angry about it, right? Because we're not releasing the grief, and the grief is just happening over again and over again. And so eventually we get angry. So that's a childhood anger-based emotion, which we often then tried to express, and then we got shut down through pain. So we got punished or whatever for expressing it, and we got shut down through pain. So now we've got the blocking emotions of our childhood anger and pain associated with our childhood anger. So that's one of their blocking emotions. Now, if you think about it, what was shutting us down really, even at the childhood level, was fear of pain. Does that make sense? It's not actually fear of anger, because we were fine getting angry before we got the pain, right? It's actually the fear of pain associated with anger. That's the reason why we shut down a lot of times. Anyway, so we shut down at childhood level. We're so afraid now of the pain that now as an adult we're protecting our pain all the time, right? And so every time our pain gets triggered, bang, I'm into protection of my pain zone, you know? And as soon as I'm in protection of the castle, as it's often called, right? So we've got this castle of emotions and we're just trying to protect them all the time. So there's our anger. Remember I said there's two reasons for anger? And just to cap them again, one is that we have an expectation that is not being fulfilled from our environment that is not being fulfilled. Now, underneath that expectation from our environment is really a feeling that you should fix something that I have inside of me. You see that? So if I get angry with you, I'm saying that you're responsible for what I'm feeling. That's really what I'm saying. And you're not responsible for what I'm feeling, but I want to make you responsible for what I'm feeling. Why would I want to do that? Because I don't want to feel it myself. Right? And instead I want to make you responsible for causing me to feel it and you responsible for fixing it. Right? So that's one reason for anger. The other, obviously, reason for anger, and in fact the majority of times, the second one is the truth, and that is we're just afraid. We're just really afraid. But we don't want to admit to ourselves we're afraid. What happens when you admit to yourself when you're afraid when you're a little kid at school? Everybody starts picking on you and, you know what I mean? You're a weakling and you're gutless and, you know, everyone starts laughing at you and so what do? You put on this other facade. The other facade is I'm the brave Johnny, you know, and the brave Johnny, he does everything that AJ wouldn't normally do. Right? So, and he's the one who looks after me in the end, really. But it's really, in the end, an avoidance of the underlying fear of total vulnerability. So let's just remove the denial emotions for a moment. So we just replace it with what we often have, which is anger. We remove the blocking emotions and replace it with what we often have, which is fear. So now we're getting down to some causal emotion that is, and the causal emotion, let's replace it with this emotion, grief. That's what's normally locked up in us. That process, if you like, is what's going on. So if I'm finding I'm slightly annoyed, frustrated, slightly angry, intensely angry, in a rage, murderous, that is up in that bracket there, all of that. If I find in this one that I'm like slightly agitated, a bit fidgety, right the way through to fearful, right the way through to terrified, that's in that bracket there. Right? And then when in this one I'm slightly sad, just a little morose, a little bit down, right the way through to sobbing with grief, that's in that bracket there, if you like. All right, so what we want to do is address why we get into anger. And so what I'm really saying is the reason why we're getting into anger is because we're really in fear and we don't want to acknowledge it. All right? And while we're in fear, fear is the cause of all of my pain. That's what I need to remember. Also, fear is going to prevent you from ever being at one with God. When you become at one with God, you will never have fear again. I just want to read something from the Paget messages for you, written by a spirit. One of my friends, Andrew, his name is. He said, "I am here, Andrew. I came to tell you that where love is, there can be no sin or unhappiness, and fear is not. We who live in the celestial spheres know this to be a fact, and with all the force and authority that knowledge gives, we declare this truth to you tonight. The love that casts out all fear is the divine love of the Father, and when a spirit obtains that, there exists no such thing as fear, and nothing that could create or permit fear to exist." That's a pretty definite statement, isn't it, about what love does. Now, scientists and psychologists and everyone would argue differently. What they would say to you is that, no, you actually naturally experience fear, right? So if you walk across the road and all of a sudden a car hits you, right in that particular moment, they say you will experience fear, right? Just before that moment occurs. So that's an interactional fear, if you like. And they define it, I forget what the term is, I think I've written it down here in this outline for you to read later. They define it as what they call realistic fear. Fear based on a real situation. Now, the next set of fears that they say are the fears that are the result of the original thing occurring. So let's say I got run over by a car when I was little. The next set of realistic fears are, all right, whenever I come up to a road, I'm going to be careful, right? Because the last time I came up to a road when I was little, I got run over or whatever. So from then on, I start to be careful. I start to be living in this fear, if you like. And then as an adult, I'm just afraid of crossing the road. So, you know, I never jaywalk. I always go up to the sign, and then, you know, here in Queensland where you can just walk across the road and hope everybody stops. But of course, you worry that nobody's going to. So you step out the road and you wait for them to, yeah, now I'm on, right? And so we have these fears come up. These are what are called, the psychologists would call natural fears. But what God's saying to us really is that in the end we won't have any fear at all, even those kind of fears. Why won't we? Because we'll already know what to do in every situation. So how would you be afraid if you knew what to do in every situation? You couldn't be, really, could you? If you know, oh, there's a guy in that car, he's not going to stop for me, you're not going to walk across the road. If you can feel his emotions before you even look at him, you would know whether to walk across the road in front of him or not. Can you see that? You say, oh no, he's not paying attention, I'll just wait here and let him go past and then I'll go across. But then another person, you can just, and you'll feel this in time, you'll just feel totally in synchronicity with all of your environment, and you'll be able to just walk up and walk across the road, and you know that the person behind you saw you, and you know the other person saw you, and so of course you won't have any fear at all. Does that make sense? When you're in a state where you've dealt with all the fears, you can actually start feeling all the emotions of everyone around you much more easily. And because of that, because of feeling all those emotions, you're now far more in tune with your entire environment, which means you don't finish up doing things that harm you automatically, not as a choice because of fear, but it's just an automatic process. So when you get that, and when you're at one with God, you're in tune with the entire universe, really. And when you're in tune with the entire universe, you're not afraid of anything. So someone can threaten you with death, and you would not be afraid of it. Whereas if you didn't have those feelings, if you had those other feelings, causal emotions, you would be. So we can get into that state. So really what God's saying to us is, you don't need to be afraid at all. And so we go, oh, okay, I don't need to be afraid at all. Okay. So what do we do then? We start trying to not be afraid at all. Right? Because that's what we're told. You know, at the end of our development, we're not going to be afraid at all. Okay, all right, I'll start acting like I'm not afraid at all. Now that's a very fictitious place to be. Because in the end, you do have emotions inside of you. The only way to actually experience what I'm talking about in reality is to release the emotion of fear inside of you. Does everyone follow that? Because without releasing the emotion of fear still exists within you. No matter how much you intellectually try to avoid it, it's going to be within you, still creating your law of attraction, and everything around you will be happening based on that. So it's far better to experience your fear. But that's where most of us freak out. Most of us have huge problems with that. Because the very first time you experience a fear event as a causal emotion type fear, like there's a blocking emotion, a childhood blocking emotion, you will be quite terrified. You might even be on the ground and shaking and all these things happening to your body and all your body's in a cramp, you know, and anybody coming along looks at you and thinks, oh, doctor, hospital, you know, and like that's how people respond to that kind of physical expression of those emotions. So even the whole universe around you, it feels, but it's actually really people on earth around you, are actually against you fully expressing your fears. And of course, the only way to go from that, if you can't fully express your fears, the only place to go is anger. You notice how anger seems to be far more acceptable? Like, you know, how many men are in a rage and yet, you know, most of society accepts it, right? And we have all of these outlets for anger in society, you know, like sports an outlet for anger for a lot of men. War is an outlet for anger, isn't it? Like, you see all these outlets for anger. But how many outlets for fear do we have? Like, do you ever see people very much dealing with their fear in an emotional experience? Have you ever done it in front of somebody else, for example? Yourself? Like, every time I've ever done it in front of somebody else, they have absolutely freaked out. And that's not very helpful for me getting to my causal emotion, right? And I remember the first time when I experienced it, I was 18 years of age. I was vomiting in the toilet. And all of a sudden I went through into this fear place, this fear fit things that I used to have. And I had so much fear that, like, yeah, I had these fear fits for most of my life. But they started having in an intense way when I was 18. And I was trying to open the door of the toilet to yell out to somebody, and all of my body just went into complete lock-up. Right? There's a medical term for it, but I won't bore you with all those things. And I was there. I couldn't speak. All of my face was all lined with my muscles all like clamping my jaw shut. All of my muscles in my body caused my legs to go up, and I was actually hanging by one arm off the ground in the toilet on the doorknob, which was a round doorknob, right, hanging there, not able to let go of the doorknob, and bashing my head was the only thing I could do. So I hit my head on the wall, trying to let other people know in the house that I was locked in the toilet and was in this state, right? Took about 10 minutes or so for somebody to answer. And this was straight after I had a car accident. This was about maybe 4 or 5 days after I had a car accident. So the car accident triggered all this fear. I went into this place emotionally, and I'm there hanging by this door in this terrible state of terror, hardly being able to breathe, my body all locked up, all the muscles all locked up and everything just hanging on the door. Now, it took two men to open the door and get me off the doorknob. And then once I got off the doorknob, they took me to the bed and they called the doctor, of course, right? They called the doctor and everyone's all worried. My sister was there present and she was screaming. and everyone else was in a panic. And this is about my own fear and everyone else is in a panic, right? And the doctor comes along and gives me a great big shot, you know, and all of a sudden I'm out to it for quite a few hours. I think it was about 16 hours or so. Now, that was my first terror experience, right? And nobody around me wanted to know about it. And I had a number since then. I had, in fact, up until I was around 33, I had about 8 of those experiences. And what it taught me was that people are terrified of your own terror. And so much so that when I knew, I could feel these experiences coming on after a while, after the first few times. I could recognise the symptoms of me going into this fear state. And what happened was, I would tell the people, all the people around me, I'm going to go into this fear state now. This is what you're going to need to do. This is how you're going to need to treat me. I had to sort of give them a heads up, right, before they'd actually allow me to go through the experience. And eventually I got to the point when I was 33 where I started facing the terror face on, like head on. And so I had 2 of those fits a day for 3 months. Right? So eventually I got through them all. They started off, they were about 2 hours long. The best way I could liken them was, for me, it was like I was in what's that when you get cramp? You know, but cramp all through your body for 2 hours straight. Can't speak, can't do anything else, and a lot of times I passed out because I couldn't breathe properly either. I always survived them. And they, the doctors did their thing, the ECGs and the scans and all those different things, and found nothing, of course. And of course, because it's all emotional. It's all driven by emotions. And eventually I learnt how to deal with fear. And it was an amazing thing to be able to learn how to deal with fear. Because after 3 months, I never had one of those again, ever. One of those fear fits ever again. And after that time, I was not afraid of dealing with any single emotion inside of myself. So that was the benefit of experiencing those things. It was the fear that was preventing me from actually accessing other emotions. And so I had to work through the fear first. And for many of us in the audience, this is the process you're going to have to go through. Maybe to not that intensity, but you're going to have to start confronting these fears that are within you and allowing their experience. Now, I'm saying you'll need to allow their experience, not just the thought of it. Okay? Now, what I want to do today is give you lots of tools by which you can do this. Lots of tools to actually help you get into these fear-based experiences and have the courage and the ability to get your way through them so they no longer affect your life at all. Does that make sense? That's the idea. Now, who's already frightened? Okay. No worries, that's good. By tomorrow afternoon, we'll be really there, hopefully. The key is that with every one of these experiences, you will live through it. And I would like to discuss with you two basic errors that we have as a part of our belief system that's almost in, well, from what I've seen, it's in every single person in the human race. And by the way, there are literally thousands of spirits with us here, and many of them have exactly the same problem. Right? So it's not just present here on earth, but also in the spirit world. The first belief is this. Belief number 1. This is a fear-based belief, right, that we have. Belief number 1 is, I cannot cope with all of my emotions. All right. Now, let's just look at this fear from a practical point of view. If I believe that, can you see how that's going to stop me from having my emotional experiences? If I believe I'm not going to be able to cope with every single emotion that's going to come at me from within myself, because that's the only place they can come from within yourself. If I believe that, then I am going to start shutting down emotional experiences that I believe I'm not going to be able to cope with. So what we finish up doing when we're in this state is we say, all right, the divine love path is, we've got to be allowing our emotions on the divine love path to connect to God. You know, love is emotional, so I've got to learn how to love, so that's an emotion too. So I start seeing the relationship between emotions and love and connecting to God. So I understand all of that. And so I then go down the track of, all right, what emotions can I cope with? Oh, I can cope with, feeling fear about somebody being angry with me. Yeah, I cope with that. So what I do is my soul creates an event where somebody's angry with me and I go into my fear about that, feel that, and I get through that. And then after a while, if I've dealt with that from a causal emotion, gone through some grief, what eventually happens is nobody gets angry with me anymore. And that's wonderful, so I've had some gain there. But then I might have been abused as a child. And that's a whole set of emotions, isn't it? Like if any of you have been abused as a child, either sexually or violently, know how difficult it is to work through those groups of emotions, right? Now those emotions, I might definitely have this feeling that I just cannot cope with them. And so I put those emotions to the side, over there, in that box over there, and then I usually put a few books on top of that box, and you know what I mean? And eventually I make that box disappear from my own consciousness. And so then I go down, and eventually you come up to someone like AJ or someone else who's connected with their emotions too, and you say, you know, I reckon I've dealt with most of the things in my life, and they can feel this thing. And oh, have you dealt with your abuse issue when you were a child? Oh, I don't remember being abused when I was a child. Oh, okay. What's happened? What's happened is that there's so many blockages now to that box of emotion that we can't even connect with the fact that that's even happened. Right? But that whole box is going to have to be opened, you know, and allowed out. Now, if I believe this, that I cannot cope with all of my emotions, I am never going to open that box. You see the problem with that belief? If I believe that, that box is going to stay closed. And I will pass over into the spirit world, and I've talked to literally thousands and thousands of spirits who still have the same box closed. You know, a lot of people on earth have this belief that when I pass over into the spirit world, that means all of a sudden I'm all-knowing and all of my problems are gone and I don't have any more emotions that are sad anymore to deal with and everything's fine. And that's not what happens, because I've talked to literally thousands of spirits where that hasn't happened. What's happened instead is that they've had this belief that they can't cope with their emotions, with all their emotions, that got constructed at a very young age in their life on earth, and they still have that same belief in the spirit world. And they live in that state for many hundreds, if not thousands of years. A few weeks ago we talked to a group of spirits who travelled with myself and Mary in the 1st century, and that group of spirits still were locked up in this state. They felt that they couldn't feel some of their emotions about what happened in their interaction with myself after 2,000 years. So don't think that just because you've, you know, had some kind of death experience or gone and died and then everything's going to be fine, because while you have that belief in you, it's not going to be fine. We need to deal with this belief, this number one fear-based belief. Number two fear-based belief. I am alone. Now, I'm not saying to change these beliefs, by the way, not intellectually anyway, right? What I'm saying is we need to recognise these as major impediments to our emotional processing. Now, an extension of I am alone is God doesn't care for me. God doesn't exist. I haven't got any spirit friends around me that exist. I've got no friends on earth really who care about my emotions either. I am alone. And what I'm saying is that that belief shuts you down in a state of fear from experiencing your emotion. Does that make sense? There are many flavours of these beliefs. Like a flavour of this belief could be things like my emotions are, I just went. My emotions are big. And I just went. This happened to me early this morning too. I might go for that, yeah. I won't fix it. Is that still working? Yeah, that's still working. These are both on the same system, so it means this thing's going. All right, so my number one belief, this I cannot cope with all of my emotions, that belief can cause other subsequent beliefs, is what I'm discussing. And other subsequent beliefs are, my emotions are too big to be able to be felt by one person. The truth is, of course, quite different to that. If the emotion entered you, then it can certainly exit you. Right? But a lot of times we have these emotions enter us, get stored, another one enters us, gets stored, another one enters us, gets stored, another one enters us, gets stored. What happens then? We've now got 5 of them, and now it's starting to look pretty big, right? So this is the result of us not being able to release the emotions one by one. This one is more insidious. This one is basically saying that there is no God, and there's no God that cares for you. You are alone. God doesn't love you. That's a big belief, a fear-based belief that the majority of the earth has. Now, with these 2 primary fear-based beliefs, we will not experience causal emotion. You'll get to a causal emotion that you need to experience, and you won't be able to experience it because one of those 2 beliefs is present in us. So obviously one of the first things we need to do is emotionally experience those beliefs. Does that make sense? Because remember, fear can only be released by the emotional experience of fear. How do you release that you're alone? By actually feeling you're alone and releasing that emotion, by actually feeling the emotion. It's only the unfelt emotions that get locked up or stored inside of you. When the emotions are in motion, when they're actually being felt by you, they're no longer getting locked up inside of you. Now, let's look at those things in terms of what the truth is. Now, what I've done is written in the outline that I've given, that I'll be putting on the net, some of the truths about this. And I wanted to read them because there's some quotes from different people that I want to get right. One is from a lady who wrote a heap of childhood books. Her name's Trace Moroney. Have any of you heard of her? Trace Moroney. She wrote this book and a group of books, actually. One of these books is called When I Am Feeling Scared. My suggestion is buy her whole set of books. Excellent books, all of them. Anyway, this is a quote from one of these books. When children trust themselves to handle painful feelings of fear, anger and sadness, they gain an inner security that allows them to embrace the world in which they live. With greater tolerance of painful feelings, children become free to enjoy their world, to feel secure in their abilities and to be happy. You see, you imagine the gift of a little child knowing that no matter what emotion it has to face in its life, it's going to be able to deal with it. That's a pretty big gift, isn't it? And most of our children actually believe that. Believe it or not, before we get involved in their lives, they actually believe that. But what happens is all of this multi-generational stuff gets imposed on them, and eventually they no longer believe that. So that addresses this truth. This error, doesn't it? Or this fear is addressed by that truth. If I have the confidence to deal with every single emotion that's within me, no matter what it is, then of course I am going to feel like I'm pretty secure within myself. I won't need you to fix my emotion. I won't need you to make anything feel better. I can be alone and still feel totally secure. Right? Very important. A quote from the Paget Messages. From all this you may understand that we spirits who know the truth have a great work to do, to enable these darkened spirits to understand and believe that their false hopes and dreadful fears have no foundation in truth and will never be realised. You see, this is the other problem with fear. If something happens when we're a child, gets locked up inside of us, and we then carry that around with us the rest of our life, thinking it's going to happen again. Right? But most of the time it never happens again. Right? Most of the time the things we are afraid of never happen again. And of course when we get to the spirit world, they can't happen again. You see? And so unfortunately a lot of people, by the time they get to the spirit world, have such a strong belief inside of them that these things, that they need to be afraid of these things, that it's now only their belief that stops them from progressing. So for instance, let's say you were growing up in a religion when you're on earth, 4 or 5 going along to Sunday school, and you get told that if you do a bad thing, if you lie, you'll be in hell forever. Now many of you have been told this in your childhoods, right? Now you imagine, if you come to believe that emotionally, what's going to happen? Right. Well, for a start, there's a high likelihood you won't do anything wrong by the definition of the people who gave you that belief. But secondly, you are now so locked up in fear of doing something wrong that you often will get into the mode of never trying anything at all, just in case you might do something wrong. And you'll be so locked up in that belief that you'll even believe that if you have done something wrong, that you're condemned forever. Now, these are beliefs that people pass with over into the spirit world. And what's all that about? It's all about some underlying causal emotional beliefs that we have some terror or fear about in the end. Many of you will notice, even with other things, that you weren't afraid when you were little. Like, how many of you played with spiders when you were small? Right? How many of you same people found that mum or dad really went into a panic when you did it? Okay? Right? I remember playing with a redback spider when I was very small. I was about 2 or so. And I put it on my hand and I walked in to my mum to give her the redback spider. And she went absolutely ballistic. Right? Now, many of us will think that's a realistic fear, but it's not really. I wasn't afraid of it, and the redback wasn't biting me. But since that moment, what do you think I've been afraid of? Some spiders, right? And so naturally, sooner or later, because of this fear, it's going to get triggered, isn't it? So I've had spiders falling on me. I've gone, and you know, all sorts of things that happen with spiders since that time. Before then, everything was fine, and I was fine with them. And ironically, the same thing happened to my youngest son as well. His mother did the same thing with him, and he's in the same state with spiders. So why did that happen? It's because I've had this fear injected, if you like, into me, and now it's lived with me until I release it. So I'm not afraid of them now because I've had to release that. Does that make sense? I've had to deal with that emotion and release that and experience that emotion. How do you do that? You go and get a movie like Arachnophobia. You ever seen that movie? Where there's spiders walking inside of people's nose and these big things, like big spiders, right? And what you do is you sit down with the movie and you play it over and over again and feel your terror about it and just allow yourself to experience it. Or, like some of the other things I've done, is lay down and just imagine spiders crawling over me and just laying there and not being able to do anything. Right? And just feel the fear that comes up and breathe, diaphragmatically breathe and just feel the fear, feel the fear, feel the fear, until you can get to the point where you can pick one up. And then, there's still a little more work I feel I've got to do with it, because I still have a tendency to still avoid them a little. So I'm not afraid of them anymore. I can pick them up and whatever, but I still have this tendency. There's this initial, you know how you have that initial, oh, what's that? Oh, that's a spider. So there's still a little bit of fear there, right? Still there, needing to be dealt with. But eventually you can work your way through all of those kind of fears. How many of you are afraid of snakes? Yeah. Yeah. Well, Peter here, he's not afraid of snakes. Right? What Peter does is he goes along and picks them up by the tail, even if it's a tiger snake. Right? It's true. I've seen a picture of him doing it. He's got you ask him to have a look at some of his pictures that he's got home, and you'll see him holding up a tiger snake like this. Right? So he's not afraid of snakes. So why isn't he afraid of snakes? Hasn't been injected. By the fear. Yeah, by the fear. Mind you, Peter's been bitten a few times by different creatures, haven't you? Yeah, you want to talk a little? Yeah, just with the mic.
I have been bitten quite a few times, and the cure's worse than the bite.
Exactly.
When you go to hospital, they're so excited that someone's been bitten by a snake. They just want to inject you with everything they've got. And if you don't explain to them really carefully which snake it was, then they're going to inject you with, brown snake antivenin, which is like getting bitten by a brown snake, when really you need it.
When you've got a tiger snake bite.
Right.
Yeah.
But the question I wanted to ask was, when you walked in to your mother with the redback on your hand and she freaked out, what was your law of attraction and how did that happen?
Well, remember, our law of attraction is our parents' law of attraction when we're little. So it's actually my mother's law of attraction. I was taking into her a spider to help trigger her emotional injury. You follow me? So I'm taking into her. Instead, what happened, instead of her feeling her fears and emotions about that particular emotional injury, Instead, what she did was connected with a lot of fear within her, with me. So what happened is I'm not really afraid of the spider. What I'm afraid of is my mother's reaction to the spider. Does that make sense? And that's what was injected into me, if you like. So now when I see the spider, I'm afraid of my mother's reaction. I'm trying to nurse my mother's reaction. This happened to me with cats and all sorts of things, and this is why many children get allergies, right? So with cats, for example, my father, whenever he saw a cat, wanted to shoot one. So me having a nice relationship with a cat was already in disagreement or disharmony with my father's approval. Does that make sense? So what am I looking for as a child? I'm looking for, firstly, my mother and father's approval. So what happened with me then, every time I picked up a cat, I started having a runny nose. Right? So runny nose, and eventually I got such bad that I have these puffy eyes and runny, you know what it's like with an allergy like that. And what I had to do there was work through my emotional connection with my father with cats and what I felt there. Once I did that, I can pick up a cat and the cat sleep on my bed or whatever, and it's fine. So a lot of times it's actually our relationship with the parent that causes the injection of the emotion.
And at what point does that change? Like, if you walked in now with a funnel web on your hand and you showed it to your mum, she'd probably still freak out.
She would, but now that I've dealt with that causal childhood fear, her freaking out, and not so much the causal childhood fear about spiders, but the causal childhood fear about her reaction. You see, if I get rid of that, now I can show Mum a funnel web spider, she can freak out and I'll smile and say, oh, that's funny. Do you know what I mean?
That's what I do with my mother-in-law and snakes.
Yeah, exactly. So can you see how when we become an adult and we've released the connection between the childhood experience and the person, what happens then is that we are totally able to be in our own emotion, and therefore no matter how you react to what I say won't affect me in that state. And this is where all of you are headed, right? If you keep progressing on the divine love path, you'll get to a point where you will no longer be worried about what anybody else thinks of you, does with you, does to themselves, any of those things. None of those things will bother you. They won't trigger you, right? And you will stay in your own emotions in that state and know that there's nothing to be afraid of in that state. And not just know it here, you'll feel it all inside of you. So the feeling of fear won't even cross your emotional state at all. So in your case with snakes, you obviously don't have any causal emotion too much about snakes, but it was driven by your parents' fear of snakes to a degree, right?
Well, so my mother was terrified of snakes, and when I asked her whether it would be okay to collect them, she said, absolutely not.
Yeah.
So I said, well, I'll just ask Dad. And he said, yeah, that'll be fine. And over the course of some years of her being confronted with snakes, I used to have a death adder in my bedroom in an aquarium, and she had to deal with that. And once she was watering one of the brown snakes and it got out, and she actually caught it by the tail and got it back in, which was a big thing in her life. And I managed to get her to touch pythons and green tree snakes and things. And so over a period of time, she faced that.
Yeah, so can you see as a child you were really just helping your mum deal with her fear? And it began when you were very, very young. And part of your love of those animals, and part of your personality is a love of those kind of animals, which actually was one of the attractions of your mum giving birth to you in the first place. It's about actually helping her deal through those fears and sensations that she felt within herself.
So are you saying then, if my mum hadn't have been afraid of snakes, I might end up with a different mum?
Yes.
Okay.
Highly likely, Peter. Because the law of attraction is very, very pinpoint accurate. And so our emotional condition and our personality before we're incarnated and our emotional condition of our parents does determine the interaction that occurs. So when I walked into my mum with the redback spider, she had a choice. The choice was to either experience the emotion inside of herself, or she could then deny that emotion and reflect that back at me. And because I was a pretty sensitive child in terms of emotions, straight away I interpret that as a disapproval from my mother. Does that make sense? So now seeing a spider, up until recently seeing a spider, was always a feeling related to my mother in reflection. Yeah? Does that make sense? Jen, you would like to? You keep your hand up so that's it.
My question is about higher order creatures.
Yep.
I was bitten by a dog when I was 3.
Yep.
Could you please explain how, as a little mite like that,
Yep.
the dogs used to come to visit across the road, belonged to a neighbour of ours. My mother had said that the dog was always a very passive kind of a creature, but on this occasion it bit really badly and I went off to hospital and all the rest of it. So how does that work?
Well, someone in your family had to have been afraid of dogs.
It would have been my mother again.
And she would have been reflecting that fear. You would have just been, what happened to you was a reflection of that fear. I've been bitten by a dog 4 times in my life, and my mother's terrified of animals. Even my father gets bitten by them as well. And so obviously I had both parents very afraid of those things. Even my father even got bitten by a cat once, which is related to why he hates cats so much, you see. And then another time he got bitten by a cat and he kicked it over the fence. but he's been bitten a number of times by cats and dogs. So there's both of those fears inside.
So the animal would have been intuitive enough when it came to visit to pick up the fear that was already there.
Always.
And then...
And your mum might not have had a
me.
personal fear, but a fear of you being bitten by it. You see, there's all these different flavours of fears that we have as well that create law of attraction events. So sometimes we're not afraid of something happening to ourselves, but we're afraid of something happening to our children. Many of you feel that right now, right? If you had a choice, if your child died right now, would that be better or worse for you than if you died right now? You see, for many of you, you would feel it's better that you die first. Many of you. Some of you feel it's better that your child dies, but they're all basically based around emotional injuries, right? And often we have different flavours of emotional injuries that cause...
So maybe that might have been a protective issue, a projection from my mother about protection, a fear of wanting to protect me.
Fear of you not being protected, perhaps, yeah. But the key is for you to go into it emotionally and you'll discover the reason. Yep. So when you visit those emotions, everything comes clear very clearly, very rapidly. Yep. So getting back to these 2 primary beliefs, this second one I'd like to talk about a little more. Most of us have the problem that we don't really know God yet, right? So how do you actually love someone you don't feel you know? That's a difficulty, isn't it? And then how do you receive love from someone who you not even sure exists? Because you've never had a personal experience of God, or you've never seen God, or you know what I mean? So how do you know that you can connect to God? So this is a big issue that we need to allow ourselves to address as a fear as well. So let's look at some of the comments about the second part from a truth perspective. I mean belief in the truth that there is a close relationship between God and the individual, which may be established by prayer and the longings of the soul for the inflowing of God's love. So this is a quote from the Book of Truths there, if you like. So the truth is that these celestial spirits were saying that there is the truth of you being able to have a close relationship with God, and that relationship is established by the longings of your soul. So they're telling you that truth. But when you hear that truth, you go, oh, I don't feel any close relationship with God, you know. In my life, I've only had, a few experiences that I thought God was involved in, and even then I don't really know whether it was God or might have been a spirit for all I know, now that I'm learning about spirits, and I don't really know. And so this is why many of us also get into the pattern of, we know that we've felt our spirit guide with us, some of us, right? And so we start talking to them instead of God, right? So we start having relationships with spirits instead. And many of us who have had a history on the New Age path would probably feel that way. There's another quote. God's love is for the mortal
even if he has the passions and appetites which the flesh encumbers him with. And when a mortal fights against the temptations which these burdens impose and overcomes them, he, when he enters the spirit world, is stronger and more able to progress than when he puts off the great attempt until he becomes purely spirit. You see, part of this thing is, I've heard many of you say, I think I'll put off dealing with my emotions until I pass. Right? It's going to be easier there. Right? And here we have a spirit saying totally the opposite to you, that it's actually easier if you pass knowing how to deal with your emotions, knowing how to deal with your passions and desires, knowing how to deal with your fears. It's going to be easier when you pass. But often we go down the track, no, it's pretty hard. Like, gee, last week I cried for whatever, how many hours, 4 hours or whatever, and that was pretty intense when I did that, we might feel. And I don't want to do that anymore. I just want to have fun. Girls just want to have fun. So off we go, and we just go and have the fun, avoiding the emotions, right? And the problem with that is that we finish up passing without a real clear idea of how to deal with my emotions, with a lot of fear in me, and it's not easier there. These spirits are saying, from their own experience, that it's not. Here's another one. As you are aware, God's love is all around you and may be in you, and if permitted to flow into your soul with faith accompanying it, you'll find yourself growing in at one with the Father and realise that fact. You see, often we don't even permit God's love to enter us because we're in such a state of fear that we don't even want to connect with God. So there's all these issues about I'm alone. It's a big fear. There's like whole groups of issues, if you like, involved in that. Now, you get into a causal emotion where you're feeling some terror, and you will feel very alone in that moment, right? And so then what we have a tendency of doing is saying, all right, I'm totally alone, I can't experience this, and then we go into this one, I can't cope with this emotion, I'm alone doing this, I can't cope with this emotion. And what we've just told ourselves is two complete untruths. The truth is, right at the moment you're dealing with a causal emotion, sometimes even hundreds of people are around you and from the spirit world trying to assist you to connect with that. And God is certainly with you as well. So you're not alone. And then on top of that, God designed you to experience all of your emotions. That's the way God designed you. So you are designed to cope with everything. That's how you're designed. You don't need anyone else to help you cope with anything because you are designed to cope with it yourself. These two fear-based beliefs cause huge amounts of problems for us in our own processing. Does that make sense? Now, they are the first two beliefs. If you can deal with those two beliefs and release them emotionally, if you can deal with them, what will happen is the rest of your emotions will flow much more rapidly. All right? And each of those have different flavours, if you like, but if you can deal with those two base fears, that's the way to go. So what do we do now on a practical way to face our fears? So that's what I'd like to talk about next. What are some practical things you can do? Well, let's first look at your environment, changing your environment. So I would put this under environment. Things that you can do to change your environment so that you can experience fear. Now, some of these things are going to be emotional that you'll need to do. Some of them will be physical things that you can do. The first thing is drink lots of water. Most people go, what's that related to fear? Trust me, you drink lots of water, you'll start realising why you use your tea and why you use your coffee and why you use your Coke and why you use your, can you see, like all these other things that we use? You'll start seeing why you use them, and they're all related to fear of dealing with deeper emotion. All right? When you drink water, and my suggestion is 4 to 6 litres of water a day. So I drink about 5 a day myself, but if you drink that amount of water, you'll need to have mineral salts in your diet. So that's the other thing to remember, just some sea salts, like something like Celtic sea salt or something like that that's got mineral. salts in it. So drink water. What does that do? Every cell in your body is like a machine. It's a machine that takes in mostly water and expels impurities, and it uses the water to manufacture everything else. It uses the water and a combination of minerals in your diet and vitamins in your diet to keep itself going. The cells are like these little, every single cell of which you've got hundreds of billions in your body is like a little manufacturing system. Now, I don't know if you've gone to any manufacturing process here on Earth, like you go to a chocolate factory or you go to a sheet metal factory or whatever, you know, at the base metal place, you'll find that they use huge amounts of water to actually manufacture that particular thing. In fact, water is the thing that's used the most in every single manufacturing process almost, right? And the reason why is because water forms the basis of our planet and forms the basis of our body, it forms the basis of everything. If you don't supply your body with enough water, your body doesn't have the chance to regenerate from all of the things that we're throwing at it emotionally. So just drinking water opens you up emotionally. Right? So focus on drinking some water. Eat vegan. These are just suggestions, you don't have to do them. For a start, eating vegan is the most loving thing you can do to the environment. Right? It uses the least amount of resources in your environment. You're actually being the most loved towards your environment when you eat in that manner. Also, you're being very loving to your own body. Your own body will respond to that. Now, what will happen emotionally is you'll go through a lot of emotional withdrawals. Food-based, in particular, emotional withdrawals. And those emotional withdrawals are all related to different emotions that you're using food to suppress. Does that make sense? And what often happens is that we have an emotion come up. How many of you find this happening in a day? Like, ladies, chocolate, period time? You see the relationship? Anytime. But you can see it ups usually at certain times of stress, right? Certain times of things going on emotionally. With guys, it's often different things like Coke or some other type of sugar-based drink, right? And for many guys, it's alcohol, all right? For similar reasons. We search for some substance to give us the coping mechanism to deal with an emotion that we really need to not cope with and just experience. Does that make sense to everyone? So give up coping with emotion and start allowing the experience of the emotion. Stop using drink and food as mechanisms to deny your emotion. Now, trust me, even just doing those two things, you're going to feel some fear. Right? And what I did once was I went on this diet, right, where I just had fruit for a whole weekend. This was way, way back before I even knew about the Divine Love Path and remembered it again. And just way back, like we were talking in my 20s. By the second day, my whole body was shaking like this. Like, you'd call them the DTs, right? Like, the whole body was just shaking like this. And eventually, my whole body and all this turmoil was happening in my stomach as well at the same time. Eventually, I just had to eat. That's the way I thought, right? And I just went. As soon as I had one thing to eat, the whole thing stopped. What was going on there? Me just eating fruit for 2 days and drinking water triggered huge emotions that I wasn't allowing myself to experience, right? And this is what will happen to many if you do that. So eat vegan. These are practical things to do in your environment. Number 3, have a place that you can experience anger in. Right? So create a place somewhere where you can experience anger. So in our place, because we live in a bit bigger property than just a yard like in the town, we just hang on the back wall of the house a boxing bag, got a couple of baseball bats. We've got a metal baseball bat for hitting some metal a bit further out. And whenever myself or Mary feels angry, we're out there. connecting with that anger and then allowing the experience of that anger and then trying to drop into the fear of it. What am I afraid of each time, right? So allow yourself to do that. With fear, you may have to have a quiet sort of a location that you can actually use your imagination to actually go into a certain fear and then allow the bodily experience of it. And that might be your bedroom, or sometimes it's another room in your house or something like that. Try and arrange something in your environment. So arrange your home so that you can experience anger and fear. Right? Without judgment. So if everyone in your family, every time you get angry, gets upset with you, it's time to consider leaving your family for a while and going somewhere where nobody gets upset with you doing it. Does that make sense? Now, I don't mean they get upset with you projecting it at them, because if you're projecting it at them, you're already out of harmony with love, right? I'm talking about owning it within yourself and experiencing it for yourself. Let yourself experience those emotions. Does that make sense? Create a space around you where you can experience those emotions. What's the next thing we can do? Well, yeah, it's no good doing all of these things and then not giving yourself any time to process any of it, is it? Right? So you're going to have to somehow change your life if it's a very busy life. And by the way, it's probably busy because you're avoiding your fears. But you have to take an active steps to change your life so that you can start getting into the emotions of it. Because if you don't get into the emotions of it, you're never going to actually release it. So we can do all of these things to trigger ourselves, but then give ourselves no time to process, and we're just going to get into a terrible mess. We need to give ourselves enough love to actually experience it, to experience the thing. So emotionally, love yourself. So act in a loving way to yourself. Give yourself the time that you have to deal with these emotions. All right. Now, what's happening at the moment is quite a lot of spirits are here now with us. A lot of you are starting to feel really tired and everything, and feeling quite disconnected. A lot of you, because what's happening is we're talking about a subject, fear, which causes the depression usually of people. And so what we'd like to do is get you to stand up for a moment. Right. Now, you might want to move into a clear space somewhere around you. So you might want to get out behind a chair and move into a clear space. And what we want to do is put your arms right up in the air and breathe right in. And then as you breathe out, bend over. Right. That's it. And go up again, and as you're going up, breathe in, and then out, and this time do it faster. Right? You can bend your legs a little as you go down, and then in again. Keep going. We want to get that body flowing a bit. Just keep going. Do it a few more times. Some of you will start feeling a bit tingly in your face and everything. Don't worry too much about that. Just keep doing this a few more times. If you feel a bit faint, then you might want to sit down or go onto the floor. But keep doing it until you feel a little faint. All right? Until you feel a little faint. Yep. Till you feel a bit wonky. If you feel a bit wonky, lay down on the floor and just let yourself breathe diaphragmatically. How are we feeling? Doesn't take long to feel a bit faint, does it? All right. So if you're feeling a bit faint, just grab a chair somewhere and might want to sit it down. How are you feeling now? You're feeling a little more connected with yourself? Now, many of you are now starting to have quite a bit of tension in this tummy area here. Through here. Can you feel that? You try breathing diaphragmatically, and you'll find that there's resistance to breathing into your tummy for many of you. That's your fear. Your fear prevents you breathing into that place. All right, so if you sit down now, or maybe even lie down if you wish, and just try to concentrate on just breathing into that area of your body, into that tummy area of your body. We want to stay connected with the emotions. So we don't want to get into a depressed state with our emotions, facing our emotions. What we want to do instead is stay in the area where we feel connected with our emotion. So if that means feeling connected with fear, feel the fear. Now, you'll feel it as like a tummy turmoil in here. So many of you already feeling that. So just allow yourself to feel that. Allow yourself to feel it. So what I'm showing you now is some just little practical tools that you can use to stay in contact with your body and stay in contact with your fear. All right, so you might like to close your eyes and just breathe into this place, into the diaphragm. I'll just say a few things while you're doing that. There are many spirit beings around you at any one time. When you get into a place where you start connecting with your fear, many of these spirits get attracted to you. So the more I talk about fear, the more spirits are going to be attracted to us who are also in a state of fear. Does that make sense? So keep breathing. Now, those spirits will do one of two things for you. One thing they'll try to do with you is to make you feel tired and exhausted. Right? And so the key for you, if that's the case, is to recognize, all right, I'm feeling tired and exhausted. I wasn't feeling tired, exhausted before AJ started talking about this fear crap. And all of a sudden now I'm in this state where I don't really want to be here, I want to go. Understand, that's because of some feelings inside of me about the subject of fear. Right? So I need to allow myself to feel what I feel about that. Now, some of us have this intellectual belief that haven't got any fear anymore. And I can tell you with you categorically that there is nobody in this room that's in that state of not having any fear in them anymore. So the key is to allow yourselves to connect with what's going on inside of yourself. It's okay to be afraid. I'm allowed to be afraid. When you were little, you were often taught you weren't allowed. I'm saying to you, you're allowed to be afraid. All right? And I'm not going to tell you you've got nothing to fear, because there's plenty of things from your childhood that you know you are afraid of. All right? So allow yourself to be afraid. You're allowed to feel the fear. Okay. How are you going now? Now, all the spirits that are with us, I just want to talk to them for a moment too. You're allowed to feel your fear too, rather than affecting the people here in the room with your fear. So rather than making them more afraid or tuning out of their fear, what you need to do is tune in to your fear. You need to feel your fear too. And you need to connect to that fear and release it emotionally. Remember, that's what it's all about. Now, just as a practical thing for you, you know that breathing, that's a very, very quick way for you to get reconnected with your body. So if you find in the course of a day that you're not connected with your body, then do some of that breathing and you'll very rapidly get reconnected with your body generally. And you'll feel the reason why you're avoiding your body. And so the key is to feel the sensations in your body. Fear is in this area here mostly. right across your midriff, your third chakra area, if you think of it that way. So fear is a lot across there. So when you feel tight in that region of your body, you're often in a state where there's fear there. When you breathe like we just breathed, many of you will notice when you breathed in and went up, you felt this pain across there, across that midsection area, where it felt really tight and uncomfortable. And some of you would have felt a pain there. The key, that's telling you that you're in a state of fear in that's not being released. So let yourself feel that. Okay. So how do you feel about that breathing? How are you doing with the breathing? All right. Now, what was happening just earlier was that many of you were connecting with spirits who had one of two different goals. One of the goals was to shut you down emotionally. They're shut down emotionally and they want you to shut down emotionally. Some of them are your friends who have passed. Some of them are your old family members that have passed and so forth. And they don't believe a word I'm saying, and they're saying to you, you shouldn't believe a word he's saying either. And they want you to remain like they are in themselves, in the spirit world, still remaining in a state of shutdown. So that's one group. And the second group is a state who are in this terror-based place and want you to feel terrified constantly. Right? And some of them are angry, and so they want to project that anger at you so you're terrified and so forth. So the key for you to remember that these are all just law of attraction events. Now, often what we're doing emotionally is we're not recognising what's going on around us, and that's often because we're not connected inside of ourselves, what's going on inside of myself. When I'm shutting down an emotion inside of myself, that's when my law of attraction is going to be the most powerful about that emotion. So it's the opposite to what people tell you. What people tell you is if you re-experience an emotion of your childhood, that all you're doing is damaging yourself over and over again. And what I'm saying is, no, that's not the case. If you allow yourself to actually experience the causal emotion, it will be released from you completely, but you need to experience the causal emotion to do that. Dennis, you would like to ask a question?
Thank you. Yawning, is that another way of them suppressing you?
Yeah.
Because I find myself doing that a lot.
Yep.
Kim and I will be reacting and I'll just keep yawning.
Yep.
Especially when she gets saying, you don't want to hear me.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. But again, after maybe an hour, hour and a half, I'm just exhausted.
Yep.
And I haven't said a word.
Exactly, because there's obviously emotions coming out of you to Kim and emotions coming from her. And if you try to reconnect with yourself in that state, you'll understand why you're yawning. And yes, yawning is also a mechanism that our spirit friends, I don't know if you've noticed it, sometimes people have asked me a question, I've answered the question that's given in the audience, and then within 5 minutes that person who I answered the question to is asleep. I don't know if you've noticed that happening, but I've noticed that happening from up here quite a lot. What happens there a lot of times is the person didn't want to hear that answer, and then straight away goes into avoidance of emotionally processing that answer. And then any spirits who are around them or who also did not want to hear that answer, just assist them in that process. And you can go to sleep within 5 minutes or 2 minutes from that place. So one moment they're being totally absorbed by something, another moment asleep. And you'll notice in many of our groups, the hardest groups I've ever given to an audience have all been the ones around anger and fear. I don't know if you've noticed that. But the last time I talked about fear, a lot of the audience felt very similar to how you're feeling at the moment. And the most difficult presentation I've ever done to a group of people was a presentation in Brisbane where I talked about anger. Almost the entire afternoon was one of suppression by large groups of spirits and a lot of people not wanting to hear about their anger. So they are two very common suppression emotions that we need to allow ourselves to work our way through. Allow yourself to feel your body. So this is the next thing, on a daily basis. Allow yourself to feel your body's pains. Your body often will have pains every single day. When I say pains, I'm not just talking about the physical pains either that you feel, but also the internal organ pains that you have sometimes, and also the pains you have about your body when you look in the mirror. Right? allow yourself to feel every one of those things. So when you look in the mirror and you're looking a bit old and drawn today, you know, you acknowledge that and allow yourself to feel the emotion inside of you that it responds to seeing yourself in the mirror like that. Oh, I look terrible. You know, and allow yourself to connect with that emotionally. That's what I'm suggesting to you. And allow yourself to connect emotionally to the physical pains you feel. Every pain is a result of a fear of dealing with an underlying emotion. Does that make sense? Every pain is a result of a fear of dealing with an underlying emotion. Right? So any pain in your body is the result of a fear of dealing with an underlying emotion. So if I've got a headache, that's the result of a fear of dealing with grief. Right? And my mind struggles by creating a lot of activity, and all of a sudden I'll get a headache because I don't want to deal with the grief. Every pain in your body is like that, every single pain. Now, at any one time, many of you will feel lots of different pains if you're connected. The key is to not freak out about that and to get upset about that. The key is just to acknowledge them. All right, I've got a pain in my left leg. Right? What's that about? Left side, you know, I could go intellectually into it, but the key is to go emotionally into it. And the way I do that myself is just feel the pain in my left leg. Just breathe and feel it and just say, I'm in denial of an underlying emotion. And just keep breathing and keep breathing into that pain. The other day, myself and Mary were in the kitchen, and all of a sudden, my arm, my left arm was just, my shoulder was so painful that all that happened is I just knelt on the floor in the kitchen and just cried. There was so much pain in my arm. Right? And then as soon as I did that, I knew what the denial was about. Right? As soon as I allowed myself to connect to that, to connect to the pain. Up until then, I'd been saying to Mary, gee, this pain in my arm, you know. I've had the pain in my arm for a week or two before then, solid, but not to that intensity. And I never allowed myself to go into it, you see. But as soon as I allowed myself to go into it, immediately I knew what it was about. Whereas if I hadn't allowed myself to go into it, I would have been still trying to guess what it was all about. Does that make sense? Yeah. We're getting lots of lovely pictures here at the moment. So. What's some more? Sorry, question.
Oh, I just wanted to say that I've been fighting sleep all the way through your talk up until the breathing, and I now feel wide awake.
Okay.
Thank you.
No worries. I don't know if you should thank me. It might have been my voice putting you to sleep. Better, just microphone.
If headaches are the fear of dealing with grief, then is a migraine a more acute?
Yeah, very intense grief underneath the migraine.
Because I was talking to a lady last night who said she suffers from a migraine every single day.
Yeah,
and I told her that to look in her childhood for what could be causing that.
Yeah, deep grief in her childhood. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, and the same, obviously the different areas of your body mean different things, and you can go and get a book like The Human Body is the Barometer of the Soul and those kind of books and see the relationship. But in the end, sometimes the fastest way is actually just to breathe into the feeling. When you breathe into the feeling, all of a sudden, you know, you start allowing the feelings to flow, and you'll find out pretty rapidly, usually after that, what the emotion is.
My daughter this week, funnily enough, has just randomly got a headache or a bellyache.
Yep.
Headaches in particular.
Yep.
Is that a denial of grief on my part?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So remember, every time we're a parent and we're dealing with a child's emotion, it's to do with our denial. And recently I was just talking to a mother with, we were talking to a mother with a 9-year-old child who's in terrible pain on lots of different levels. And she goes to her mother and tells her what her mother should be doing for her to get rid of that pain, right? So, and often the mother doesn't do that, so she then gets angry with her mother for not doing it. But oftentimes, almost all the time, a child experiencing a pain is the definite result of one or both parents not dealing with a certain pain. Yep. And usually it's a law of attraction, so if the child comes to you about the pain, and doesn't go to her dad about the pain, then it's your. But if the child goes to dad about the pain and not you, then it's something to do with dads, usually. You'll see the law of attraction working quite well.